On a bright Tuesday morning in September, Dr. Sarah Mitchell woke up earlier than usual. She checked her phone one last time to confirm her flight details for the upcoming medical conference in Boston. As one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, she had earned her reputation through years of dedication and excellence. Sarah's modern apartment reflected her success, but she never forgot her humble beginnings. Growing up in a small town with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to support her education, she had learned the value of hard work. Now, at 38, she had finally reached a point in her career where she could afford the convenience of private air travel. Looking in the mirror, she adjusted her crisp white blouse and navy blazer. Her natural hair was styled professionally, and she wore minimal jewelry, just her mother's silver necklace and her medical school graduation ring. Sarah packed her briefcase with presentation materials for the conference where she would be the keynote speaker. "Everything ready, Dr. Mitchell?" asked James, her building's security guard, as she walked through the lobby. He had always treated her with genuine respect, unlike some others who seemed surprised to learn about her profession. "All set, James. Looking forward to sharing our hospital's new brain surgery techniques at the conference," Sarah replied with a warm smile. She had chosen to take a private jet this time because her presentation contained sensitive research data that couldn't risk being delayed or lost. The taxi ride to the private aviation terminal was smooth. Sarah reviewed her documentation one more time, her pilot's confirmation, security clearance, medical license, and conference invitation were all neatly organized in her leather portfolio. She had flown privately 3 times before and knew the protocol well. The terminal building stood elegant and modern against the morning sky. Several other passengers, mostly business executives, were making their way inside. Sarah noticed she was the only person of color among them, but this wasn't unusual in her professional life. She had learned to carry herself with quiet confidence, letting her achievements speak for themselves. As she approached the entrance, Sarah remembered her mother's words from years ago. "Hold your head high, baby girl. Your brilliance will light the way." Those words had guided her through medical school, residency, and countless challenging situations where people had doubted her abilities based on her appearance. The terminal's automatic doors slid open, welcoming her into the climate-controlled space. The marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and comfortable leather chairs lined the waiting area. A few people glanced up from their phones and laptops as she entered. Sarah walked confidently toward the security checkpoint, pulling her ID and flight documents from her portfolio. A young flight coordinator named Jessica Chen sat behind the main desk, organizing the morning's departure schedules. She looked up and offered a friendly smile as Sarah approached. However, before Sarah could reach the desk, a security guard stepped into her path, his face set in a stern expression that seemed out of place in the usually welcoming environment. The guard, whose name tag read Tom Reynolds, held up his hand in a stopping motion. His other hand rested on his security belt, a gesture that felt unnecessarily threatening in the peaceful terminal. Sarah noticed that he hadn't stopped any of the other passengers who had entered before her. "Ma'am, I need to see your documentation," Reynolds said, his tone notably different from the professional courtesy he had shown to previous travelers. Sarah maintained her composure, remembering similar situations she had faced throughout her career. She reached for her portfolio, aware that several people were now watching the interaction. The morning sun streaming through the terminal's large windows caught the gold lettering on her medical license as she prepared to show her credentials. Little did she know that this routine security check was about to become much more than just another minor inconvenience in her professional life. Jessica Chen, still at her desk, noticed the guard's unusual behavior and slowly reached for her phone. Sometimes the most important moments of change began with small actions, and what was about to unfold would prove to be one of those pivotal moments that exposed the persistent reality of racial bias in everyday situations. Tom Reynolds stood firmly in front of Dr. Sarah Mitchell, his hand still raised in a stopping gesture. While other passengers continued to walk freely through the security checkpoint, he subjected Sarah to an unusual level of scrutiny. "This can't be your flight booking," Reynolds said, looking at her documentation with obvious skepticism. "These private jets are very expensive. Where did you get these papers from?" His voice carried a tone that made several nearby passengers look up from their phones. Sarah took a deep breath, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Sir, I am Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Chief of Neurosurgery at Central Memorial Hospital. I'm scheduled to deliver a keynote speech at the Medical Innovation Conference in Boston. She pointed to her credentials, which clearly matched her ID. Reynolds shook his head, ignoring her explanation. Anyone can print fancy papers these days. I've worked here for 15 years, and I know who usually flies private. He emphasized the word usually while looking her up and down, making his implication clear. Behind her desk, Jessica Chen was now openly recording the interaction on her phone. She had witnessed countless passengers go through security, but never had she seen anyone treated with such obvious prejudice. Two other executives who had just walked in, both white men in suits, passed through security with nothing more than a casual nod from Reynolds. "Mr. Reynolds," Sarah said calmly, years of handling high-pressure situations in the operating room evident in her steady voice, "I've shown you my medical license, hospital ID, conference invitation, and flight confirmation. All my documents are in order. What specific additional proof are you requesting?" The guard's face reddened. "Listen here, I don't appreciate your attitude. For all I know, these could be fake. Maybe you're trying to sneak onto someone else's flight." He turned to his colleague at the metal detector. "Joe, call backup. We might have a situation here." Sarah stood her ground, though her heart was racing. She had faced discrimination before, but rarely so blatantly. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. What specific documentation are you requiring from me that you haven't asked from other passengers?" By now, a small crowd had gathered. Among them was Mark Thompson, a regular private jet passenger who had often seen Sarah at the terminal. He stepped forward. "Reynolds, I know Dr. Mitchell. She's flown from here several times. What's the problem?" Reynolds ignored Mark's intervention. "Ma'am, if you don't step aside, I'll have to report this as a security breach." His hand moved toward his radio while the other remained on his security belt. Jessica Chen couldn't stay quiet any longer. She stood up from her desk, phone still recording. "Mr. Reynolds, Dr. Mitchell's booking was processed through our system yesterday. I personally handled the verification. Everything is in order." "Stay out of this, Jessica," Reynolds snapped. "You're new here. You don't understand our security protocols." More passengers had stopped to watch, many with looks of concern and disbelief on their faces. Some had taken out their phones, sensing the gravity of the situation. Through it all, Sarah remained composed, though the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of dozens of onlookers was taking its toll. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," Sarah stated firmly. "There's no valid reason for this level of harassment." Reynolds laughed dismissively. "Of course you want to speak to my supervisor. That's what all you people do when you can't get your way." A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Jessica's hands trembled as she continued recording, knowing she was documenting something that couldn't be ignored. Mark Thompson had already pulled out his phone and was dialing the terminal manager's number. Sarah straightened her blazer, her mother's silver necklace catching the light. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I want you to think very carefully about your next words and actions. Everything you've done in the last few minutes has been witnessed and recorded. Your prejudice is showing, and it's not a good look for this establishment." The security guard's face contorted with anger, unaware that his next actions would not only cost him his job but would also spark a nationwide conversation about racial profiling in private aviation. Jessica Chen's hands shook slightly as she kept her phone steady, making sure to capture every moment of the unfolding scene. The young flight coordinator had only been working at the private terminal for 6 months, but she knew that what she was witnessing was completely wrong. From her position behind the desk, she had a clear view of everything. Her phone screen showed Dr. Sarah Mitchell standing dignified in her navy blazer, while security guard Reynolds continued his aggressive stance. The contrast between their behaviors was striking, one professional and composed, the other increasingly agitated. "You want to keep recording?" "Fine." Reynolds suddenly turned toward Jessica, his face red with anger. "This is a secure area. Recording isn't allowed." But Jessica didn't lower her phone. Instead, she pressed the button to start live streaming the incident to her social media account. "Actually, sir," Jessica spoke up, her voice stronger than she'd felt, "there's no policy against recording in the public areas of the terminal. I checked our handbook this morning." She hadn't really checked. It was a lucky guess born from desperation to help. More passengers had gathered now, and at least 5 other phones were out. recording the scene from different angles. Reynolds looked around, suddenly aware that he had become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "She could be anybody. We have strict security protocols here." His voice grew louder with each word, while Dr. Mitchell remained calm. Sarah spoke clearly, knowing she was being recorded. "Mr. Reynolds, in the past 10 minutes, you've allowed 6 other passengers through with far less scrutiny than you're showing me. The only difference I can see is the color of my skin. Would you like to explain that?" Jessica's live stream counter started climbing rapidly. 50 viewers became 100, then 500. Comments began flooding in, most expressing outrage at what they were witnessing. Her hands had stopped shaking now, replaced by a sense of purpose. "Look at these comments," a nearby passenger said, holding up his phone. "This is going viral. Hashtag Pravat terminal racism is already trending locally." The man, wearing an expensive suit, looked disgusted by Reynolds' behavior. Reynolds tried a different approach. "This is about security, not race. How many black people do you see flying private jets?" The moment the words left his mouth, several gasps echoed through the terminal. Jessica zoomed in on his face, making sure to capture his expression. "I see one right here," Sarah replied calmly, "a board-certified neurosurgeon who has every right to be here. And your question just proved my point about your prejudice." The terminal's automatic doors swooshed open, and Linda Martinez, the operations manager, rushed in. Someone had alerted her to the situation, and she looked both concerned and angry. Jessica's livestream now had over 2,000 viewers, and clips from other recordings were already spreading across different social media platforms. "What's going on here?" Linda demanded, looking between Reynolds and Dr. Mitchell. Before either could answer, Jessica spoke up. "Ms. Martinez, I have the entire incident recorded, starting from when Mr. Reynolds first stopped Dr. Mitchell. He's been treating her differently from every other passenger this morning." Jessica's voice was clear and professional. Linda watched a few moments of the live stream on Jessica's phone, her expression growing darker. The comments section was exploding with angry reactions, and several viewers were claiming to be calling the airport's corporate office. "Dr. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize for this treatment," Linda said, turning to Sarah. "Mr. Reynolds, please report to my office immediately. Your shift is over." Her tone left no room for argument. Reynolds stood there, mouth open, as the reality of his situation began to sink in. The recordings had captured every discriminatory comment, every biased action, and every moment of his unprofessional behavior. His face paled as he realized that his prejudice hadn't just been recorded. It was now being shared across the country. Jessica ended her live stream, which had reached over 5,000 viewers in just 15 minutes. She saved the video and immediately backed it up to her cloud storage. Something told her that this recording would be important in the days to come, not just for Dr. Mitchell's case, but for addressing a larger issue in private aviation. Operations Manager Linda Martinez led Dr. Sarah Mitchell to the terminal's private lounge, away from the crowd that had gathered. The elegant room, usually a quiet space for wealthy travelers, now buzzed with activity as people discussed what they had just witnessed. "Dr. Mitchell, would you like some water?" Linda asked, her face still showing concern. Sarah nodded, grateful for the moment to collect her thoughts. The past 30 minutes had been more draining than a 6-hour surgery. Jessica Chen followed them into the lounge, her phone now tucked away but still receiving constant notifications. Her video had exploded online, reaching over 50,000 views in just half an hour. Major news networks were already trying to contact her through social media. "The video has gone viral," Jessica explained, showing them her phone. "People are demanding action. Several civil rights organizations have already shared it." She paused, then added, "I hope I didn't overstep by recording." Sarah gave her a warm smile. "Jessica, you did exactly the right thing. Sometimes the only way to fight discrimination is to expose it." She took a sip of water, her mother's silver necklace catching the light as she moved. Mark Thompson, the businessman who had spoken up earlier, knocked on the lounge door. "Dr. Mitchell, there are several other regular passengers out here who want to give statements about what happened. We've all seen you fly from here before, and we want to support you." Linda nodded appreciatively. "That would be very helpful. Our security cameras caught everything, but witness statements are important too. She turned to Sarah. We'll need to file a formal incident report. As if on cue, Sarah's phone rang. It was Patricia Wong, her attorney and longtime friend. Sarah, I just saw the video online. Don't say anything more to anyone. I'm on my way to the terminal now. While Sarah spoke with her lawyer, more support arrived. Dr. James Carter, her colleague from the hospital, rushed in. He had been scheduled on a later flight but came immediately after seeing the viral video. Sarah, the hospital board is furious, he reported. They're releasing a statement supporting you and condemning the discrimination you faced. The chief of staff wants to talk to you. Jessica's phone buzzed again. The video has reached 500,000 views, she announced. And hashtag #LetMitchellFlee is trending nationally. She showed them the comments flooding in from doctors, pilots, aviation workers, and people from all walks of life, sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Linda returned from her office, looking serious. Corporate headquarters just called. They're sending their diversity and inclusion team, and the CEO wants to speak with you personally, Dr. Mitchell. They're taking this very seriously. Sarah looked around the room at all the people gathering to support her. Jessica with her crucial video evidence, Linda handling the situation professionally, Mark organizing witness statements, and her colleagues rushing to stand by her side. It was a powerful reminder that for every Prejudice person like Reynolds, there were many more willing to stand up against discrimination. Your flight crew is ready whenever you are, Dr. Mitchell, Linda assured her. We've arranged for a different security team to handle your boarding process. She paused, then added sincerely, though I completely understand if you prefer to make other arrangements. Patricia Wong arrived, briefcase in hand, bringing her confident energy into the room. Sarah, we have a strong case here. The video evidence is crystal clear, and with all these witnesses, she gestured at the growing group of supporters. Outside the lounge, they could hear the regular bustle of the terminal mixing with excited conversations about what had happened. Several news vans had already arrived, their satellite dishes visible through the terminal's large windows. Through it all, Sarah maintained her composure, just as she did in the operating room during difficult surgeries. She thought about all the young black medical students she mentored, all the barriers they still faced. Maybe this incident, as difficult as it was, would help create meaningful change. I want to continue with my original flight, Sarah decided firmly. I have a conference to attend and a keynote speech to deliver. We won't let discrimination disrupt that. She stood up, straightening her blazer. But after that, we have work to do to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. The private terminal had transformed into a hub of activity. News reporters gathered outside, their cameras pointed at the entrance. Inside, Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat in a conference room with her attorney Patricia Wong, while various officials rushed around them. The video has reached 1 million views, Jessica Chen reported, still monitoring her phone. She had been asked to stay and help document everything. Major news networks are running it on their websites. People are calling it a perfect example of everyday racism. Sarah checked her watch. Her medical conference was in 5 hours. I need to make my flight, she said firmly. But first, I want to make a statement. Patricia nodded in agreement, knowing this was an important moment. The terminal's corporate team had arrived, led by Regional Director Robert Anderson. His face showed genuine concern as he approached Sarah. Dr. Mitchell, on behalf of our entire company, I want to apologize for what happened today. Mr. Anderson, Sarah replied, her voice steady. I appreciate the apology. What I really want is action. How will you prevent this from happening to others? The room fell silent, all eyes on them. Linda Martinez, the operations manager, stepped forward with a tablet. We've reviewed all security footage from the past 3 months. Reynolds has shown a pattern of discriminatory behavior. We found at least 7 other incidents where he treated minority passengers differently. Sarah stood up, smoothing her blazer. Then I'm not just speaking for myself today. I'm speaking for all of them too. She turned to Jessica. Is your phone still ready to record? Jessica nodded eagerly, raising her phone. Several news cameras have been allowed inside, their red lights blinking. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering all the times she had faced doubt and discrimination in her career. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I am a board-certified neurosurgeon, and today I was blocked from boarding my flight because of the color of my skin. Her voice was clear and strong. But this isn't just about me. This is about every person who has ever been judged by their appearance rather than their credentials. The cameras rolled as Sarah continued. To every black child who dreams of success, don't let anyone tell you where you belong. To every person in power, do better. Check your biases. Create real change. Robert Anderson stepped forward again. Dr. Mitchell, we want to announce some immediate changes. We're implementing mandatory bias training for all staff, reviewing all our security protocols, and creating a passenger advocacy board. We would be honored if you would help guide these changes. Patricia Wong quickly added, and we'll be following up to ensure these promises are kept. She gave Anderson a meaningful look, making it clear that they would be watching. Dr. James Carter, who had been making calls to the medical conference organizers, approached with good news. Sarah, they've adjusted the schedule. They want you to share this experience as part of your keynote speech. They think it's an important message for the medical community. As the corporate team discussed details with Patricia, Sarah turned to Jessica. Thank you for being brave enough to start recording. You risked your job to do the right thing. Jessica smiled. I just did what anyone should do when they see injustice. Oh, and the terminal wants to promote me to head of passenger relations. She beamed with pride. Linda approached with new boarding passes. Your flight is ready, Dr. Mitchell. I personally overseen all arrangements. Would you like to board now? Sarah looked around the room at all the people who had stood up for what was right. Jessica with her phone, Linda with her quick action, the passengers who spoke up, and her legal team ready to fight for change. Yes, she said, gathering her belongings. I have a speech to give, and now I have an even more important message to share. She touched her mother's silver necklace, drawing strength from it. As she walked toward her gate, head held high, Sarah knew this incident would lead to real changes. Sometimes it took one person standing strong, supported by others who believed in doing what was right, to create a ripple effect of positive change. The cameras followed her progress through the terminal, but Sarah walked with the same confidence she brought to her operating room. She had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change, and this was just the beginning. Within hours of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's private jet taking off for Boston, the story of her experience had spread across the country like wildfire. Jessica Chen's original video had now reached over 5 million views, and major news networks were running the story on their evening broadcasts. Breaking news. Prestigious neurosurgeon faces racial discrimination at private aviation terminal. Read the headline on National News Network. The footage played on repeat, showing Reynolds' aggressive behavior, Sarah's calm responses, and the support she received from bystanders. In the staff break room at Central Memorial Hospital, nurses, doctors, and other medical staff gathered around the television. Many of them knew Dr. Mitchell personally and were shocked to see their respected colleague being treated so poorly. That's our Dr. Mitchell, exclaimed Nurse Rodriguez, who had worked with Sarah for 5 years. She's performed hundreds of life-saving surgeries, and they treated her like she didn't belong there. She shook her head in disbelief as she watched the footage. Social media platforms were exploding with reactions. #LetDrMitchellFly had evolved into #DoctorsAgainstDiscrimination, with medical professionals across the country sharing their own experiences with racial prejudice. Back at the private terminal, Linda Martinez was dealing with a flood of media requests. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the incident. Security footage from the terminal's cameras had been released, showing even more clearly how Reynolds had let other passengers pass while singling out Dr. Mitchell. The evidence is overwhelming, Linda explained to a group of reporters. Our review of past security footage shows a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. We failed as an organization by not catching this sooner. We're committed to making things right. Meanwhile, Jessica Chen had become an unexpected hero on social media. Her decision to record the incident was being praised by civil rights activists and ordinary citizens alike. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support and interview requests. I just couldn't stay silent, Jessica told a local reporter. When you see something wrong happening, you have to take action. Dr. Mitchell deserved better, and so does everyone else who faces discrimination. The terminal's corporate office released an official statement. We have terminated the employment of the security guard involved in today's incident. We are implementing immediate changes to our training and security protocols. Discrimination has no place in our organization. By mid-afternoon, the story had caught the attention of several civil rights organizations. The National Association for Equal Rights announced they would be launching an investigation into discrimination practices in private aviation. Dr. James Carter, watching all this unfold from his office, received a call from the medical conference organizers. They want to adjust tomorrow's schedule, he told his assistant. They're giving Dr. Mitchell a larger platform to address not just medical innovations, but also the challenges minorities face in the medical field. Reynolds, the former security guard, had gone into hiding as reporters camped outside his house. His face was now recognizable across the country as a symbol of everyday racism. His previous employer called the terminal to report that they had fired him 2 years ago for similar discriminatory behavior. On the private jet heading to Boston, Sarah sat quietly, reading through hundreds of supportive messages on her phone. Her incident had sparked a larger conversation about privilege, prejudice, and power in professional spaces. A text message from her mother popped up. "Baby girl, you stood your ground with grace and dignity. You're making change happen." Sarah smiled, touching the silver necklace she always wore. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Dr. Mitchell, we're receiving messages of support from air traffic controllers across our flight path. They'd all want you to know they stand with you." As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, Sarah began preparing her keynote speech for tomorrow. She knew it would be different from what she had originally planned. Sometimes the most important medical lessons weren't about surgical techniques or brain anatomy, but about treating all people with dignity and respect. The story continued to spread, gaining momentum with each passing hour. What had started as one woman's experience was becoming a catalyst for examining discrimination in professional settings across America. And this was just the beginning of the change that was coming. 1 week after the incident at the private terminal, the consequences of Reynolds' actions were still unfolding. The conference room at Central Memorial Hospital was packed as Dr. Sarah Mitchell addressed the hospital board and national media. "The response to what happened has been overwhelming," Sarah said, standing confidently at the podium. "But this isn't just about one incident or one person. It's about changing the system." Her mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride. The private aviation company had just announced major changes to their operations. Their CEO, Michael Brooks, stood next to Sarah at the press conference. "We're implementing new policies across all our terminals," he announced. These changes include bias training, diverse hiring practices, and a new passenger advocacy program. Jessica Chen, who had recorded the original video, had been promoted to head a new passenger relations department. Her video had now reached 20 million views and was being used in training programs across the country. "We're creating a system where passengers can report discrimination without fear," Jessica explained to reporters. "Every complaint will be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly." She wore a new badge that read Head of Passenger Relations and Diversity Initiatives. Linda Martinez, the operations manager, shared the results of their internal investigation. "We found 15 cases of discrimination by Reynolds in the past year alone," she revealed. "We've reached out to each person affected to apologize and make things right." The terminal's corporate office had set up a special fund for minority students interested in aviation careers. They named it the Mitchell Initiative in Sarah's honor, with a starting budget of $5 million. "Education and opportunity are key to fighting discrimination," Sarah said when they announced the fund. "We need to open doors for everyone who dreams of a career in aviation, medicine, or any other field." Reynolds, meanwhile, was facing serious consequences. 3 other companies came forward to report similar incidents during his employment with them. The state had launched an investigation into his pattern of discriminatory behavior. "Actions have consequences," Patricia Wong, Sarah's attorney, told the press. "We're working to ensure that Mr. Reynolds never works in a position of authority again. His behavior represents exactly what we need to eliminate from our society." The medical conference where Sarah had delivered her keynote speech had turned into a watershed moment. Her presentation, which combined medical expertise with a recent experience, received a standing ovation and went viral online. "Dr. Mitchell didn't just teach us about neurosurgery," said Dr. Thompson, a conference organizer. "She taught us about courage, dignity, and the importance of standing up against discrimination." The video of her speech had been viewed by medical students across the globe. Back at the terminal, changes were visible everywhere. New signs displayed a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Security staff wore body cameras, and customer service representatives came from diverse backgrounds. The waiting area now featured a wall dedicated to celebrating diversity in aviation. Sarah's hospital had also taken action. They created a new committee on diversity and inclusion, with Sarah as the chairperson. Medical students from minority backgrounds were being offered new mentorship opportunities. "What happened to me was terrible," Sarah told a group of young medical students, "but look at the change it's creating." Sometimes it takes one incident to open people's eyes and start real conversations. The National Aviation Authority announced new guidelines for all private terminals, using Sarah's incident as a case study. Security procedures were being reviewed and updated across the country. Jessica's role in exposing the discrimination had inspired others. Reports of similar incidents at other facilities increased as people felt more empowered to speak up. Each report was now being taken seriously and investigated. "When I started recording that day," Jessica reflected, "I just wanted to help one person. I never imagined it would lead to such big changes." She had become a sought-after speaker on corporate responsibility and active bystandership. As Sarah prepared for her first flight since the incident, she noticed the differences. The security team was more professional, more diverse, and more respectful. Other passengers smiled in recognition, some even thanking her for speaking up. "Change is possible," Sarah told her mother as they walked through the terminal. "Sometimes it just needs someone to stand strong and others to stand with them." Her mother squeezed her hand, both of them knowing that their fight for equality would continue, but now with more allies than ever before. 3 months after the incident that shook the private aviation industry, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. Behind her, a large screen showed Jessica Chen's now famous video, which had reached over 50 million views worldwide. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Sarah began, addressing a room full of aviation industry leaders and civil rights advocates. "But when we stand together, it happens faster than we might expect." She wore her mother's silver necklace, which had become a symbol of strength for many who followed her story. The conference room at the National Aviation Center was packed. Among the audience sat Jessica Chen, now a nationally recognized advocate for workplace equality, and Linda Martinez, who had been promoted to Regional Director of Operations after her handling of the incident. "In just 3 months," Sarah continued, "we've seen changes that many thought would take years." She clicked to the next slide, showing impressive statistics. Over 200 private aviation terminals had adopted new anti-discrimination policies. Complaints of discrimination had dropped by 60% where new policies were implemented. Minority employment in private aviation had increased by 35%. The Mitchell Initiative had already awarded scholarships to 50 minority students. In the front row, Sarah's mother wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter lead this transformation. Next to her sat Robert Anderson, the regional director who had helped implement the first changes at his terminal. "The numbers don't tell the whole story," Sarah said, switching to a slide showing faces of new aviation industry employees from diverse backgrounds. "These are the real changes. People who might have been turned away 3 months ago are now welcomed and respected." Jessica stood up to share her part of the story. "When I started recording that day, I was scared," she admitted. "But doing the right thing gave others courage to do the same." Her new organization, Record for Rights, had trained thousands of people on how to safely document and report discrimination. The private aviation company had completely transformed its approach. Their new training program, developed with Sarah's input, had become the industry standard. Terminal staff now reflected the diversity of the communities they served. "Remember Tom Reynolds?" Linda asked the audience. "His case has become a mandatory training example across the industry. His actions showed us exactly what not to do, and more importantly, how to prevent such behavior." Reynolds himself had faced serious consequences. After multiple companies came forward with similar complaints, he had been banned from working in aviation or security. His case was being studied in workplace discrimination courses nationwide. Sarah's hospital had also seen positive changes. The diversity committee she chaired had implemented new policies that were being copied by medical institutions across the country. Young doctors from minority backgrounds regularly sought her mentorship. Dr. Mitchell's experience forced us to look in the mirror, said Dr. James Carter, who had flown in for the conference. We realized that discrimination doesn't just happen in obvious ways. It's often subtle, systemic, and needs active work to eliminate. The Mitchell Initiative had grown beyond its original scope. What started as a scholarship fund now included mentorship programs, internships, and advocacy training. Sarah regularly spoke to student groups, sharing her story and encouraging them to pursue their dreams regardless of obstacles. The silver lining to what happened, Sarah told the audience, is that it sparked a conversation we needed to have. But more importantly, it led to action. She gestured to the diverse group of aviation professionals seated on stage with her. As she concluded her speech, Sarah shared a final story. Just last week, she had flown from the same terminal where the incident occurred. The difference was striking: diverse staff, respectful treatment, and a welcoming atmosphere for all passengers. "This is not the end of our journey," Sarah said, wrapping up her presentation. "It's just the beginning. Every person in this room has the power to create change, to stand up against discrimination, and to build a more inclusive future." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Among them were aviation executives, civil rights leaders, and many of the people who had supported Sarah that day at the terminal. Together, they had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for lasting change. As Sarah hugged her mother afterward, she thought about all the doors that would now be open for the next generation. Sometimes it took one person's experience, captured on video and supported by allies, to create the spark that lit the way forward for many others.